Okay, good evening. Can people hear me? Good evening, can you hear me? Is the sound okay? Good. Good, thank you. So 7:30, so let's get started. There's quite a few people here already. Thank you all for being here this evening. This is the MENA PD Academy by Macmillan Education's webinar on developing inclusive education in the MENA region. Hopefully you find it useful. For those of you who do not yet know me, I'm not sure how that's possible, but my name is Nathan Waller, and I am the teacher trainer for Macmillan Education in MENA. And I am here to talk to you today or this evening about diversity, inclusion, and special educational needs and disability, or SEND as I will refer to it moving forward, because it's a long title and I can't keep saying it over and over again. So I will use the shortened SEND abbreviation quite commonly. As for me, I've lived, worked, and traveled pretty extensively across this region, across MENA. And I see MENA as being incredibly diverse. I've been to everywhere from Tunisia to Oman, to Lebanon, to Egypt, most places I've been. And it's an incredibly diverse region of the world, linguistically, socially, culturally, historically, environmentally. Pretty much has everything you could possibly hope for, all squashed into our little region. For those of you who are part of our Facebook group, you probably see me trying to highlight and celebrate that diversity across the region every week. Maybe I've posted some of these pictures before, I'm not sure. But these are the kind of photos I've taken across my travels in the MENA region, from Petra in Jordan, to boat trips on the Nile, the mega cities of Dubai, Riyadh, and I've also taught in this region as well. But despite all of that diversity and a lot of the other amazing qualities that I think that we see in MENA, things like tolerance, hospitality, community, some amazing things that you see and experience across the region, I feel like when it comes to educational policies and practices, MENA could still possibly make some improvements in terms of inclusivity, especially for students with additional needs. Now, we all know and have felt 2020's sharp bite, I guess we would say it might be. And it seems as though we're going to continue to feel this for a little bit longer. Travel is obviously very difficult, hence the reason why we are doing this. But I'm so glad to see that we can connect with so many of you in so many places across MENA. I do feel like we're starting to get used to the new ways of working. I see teachers posting things online about how they never thought that would be possible, but they're actually enjoying doing online classes. And I feel like in the 9 months or so that we've had to experience this, that teachers have pushed themselves in this time frame probably more than they may have ever done in all the years that they've been teaching, which I think is great. But of course, there's obviously a downside to this as well. It's stressful, it's overwhelming, people are anxious, and I think that most teachers are probably exhausted at this time. So hopefully things do get easier for you over the coming months. Hopefully people can enjoy a winter break at some point. But we are here for you all the time. So regardless though of your experiences of this year of 2020, and I'm sure they've been challenging in different ways, lots of people have had different types of challenges, whether that's dealing with childcare, dealing with changes within the school, the classroom, all of these things. I think that it's important that we come together as a community even more and ask the very difficult questions about the quality of our students' learning. Improving the experiences of our students in the classroom needs to remain our priority. And this means for all students. We also need to cast a critical eye over our education system in general. Time to use those critical thinking skills that we keep asking our students to use. And we need to ask who is included and who is excluded and why, who benefits and who doesn't, again, why, and whether what we do and what we believe in actually, so education, does what it says on the tin, providing opportunities so that children realize and reach their potential and are well prepared for life, work, and citizenship. If we want a more inclusive and equitable society and global community, it is our role as educators to model that to our children, to our students, and to the generations that will come after us and inherit our society from us. Okay, so a little bit heavy starting off there, but I'd like to soften that a little bit, and I'd like to read a poem all about inclusivity. It is called All Are Welcome. All are welcome, come and see my classroom family. Together we learn, laugh and grow, always sharing what we know. Lunch, play, and all through the day, we look out for each other in every way. Words matter, so we try to be kind, never leaving a friend behind. Loving and kind, thoughtful too, respect one another, it's what we do. All are welcome, come and see my inclusive classroom family. I like this poem, it's nice and light, but I think it's got a nice message, and I want us to carry that message with us through this session. Keep this little poem in the back of your mind. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at inclusive education and special educational needs. These are terms that I'm sure that you are familiar with, but our aim is to get a little bit deeper under the skin of what these mean and how they are experienced differently by different people. And we're hoping to do that within the context of MENA. The world has changed very rapidly over the past few decades, and it seems even more so sometimes in 2020. And teachers, no matter where they are or what their teaching scenario is like, are now engaging with more diverse sets of students, families, and now teaching situations as well. So to start, I've got a digital blackboard here, and I'd like us to think about this opening. And I'd like to think about how you would complete this sentence. I'll give you a moment to do so. Have a little think about it. Before we look at the statement itself, I think it's useful to perhaps examine some aspects that underpin or influence what inclusion could be. For example, we need to look at diversity. So each student has their own individual characteristics, personalities, interests, strengths, and perceptions about the world around them. And schools must teach that it's these diverse characteristics that enrich the experience of sharing with others. But diversity isn't only at the level of the individual, it exists at the societal level as well. There's regional diversity, cultural diversity, and we've got to take into account the overlapping spheres of influence that move and shape people in a given community. This can include family, probably the most important one, the school, and the wider community. So there are various influences that shape us and influence how we see and perceive the world around us. So my question for you, I've got a lot of questions this evening. They're rhetorical questions. You don't have to answer them. You can answer in the chat box if you wish, but they're questions for us to think about. Maybe you want to make some notes or come back to it later. I see somebody is already including something in the chat box, which is great, and I'll have a look at them later. So diversity. My question for you, how much diversity is there in your teaching context? There's probably more than you think, but what does this diversity look like? Sometimes we think about diversity and it could be gender or race or religion. But there's lots of different ways we can look at diversity. We also need to consider inclusion's evil twin, which is exclusion, on the opposite side of the fence. We're going to look at barriers to inclusion in education shortly, but there are many ways, direct or indirect, that we can be excluded in our lives. And these exclusions, whether we like it or not, also shape us. So maybe, again, take a moment to reflect on your own personal experiences of exclusion. I'm sure we all have them. It could be about your age, it could be gender, ability, or any other feature that makes you who you are. So how did you feel when it happened? Did it have an impact on your relationships at the time? Do you still feel this impact to this day? Because a lot of times we carry with us the impact that exclusion has on us, even in small ways. Good, so we've got lots of questions or things to think about as we start the session. So let's go back to our opening statement. I'm going to see what people have written in the chat box, actually. It's respect and support everyone. Good. Yeah, really nice. Great, excellent. So I'm currently working on a project around inclusive education in MENA for Macmillan Education, who I work for. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this at the end. I know that for some of you, you are joining this webinar because you are already a part of that project, which is great. And hopefully you will see some of the things that we're going to talk about later. If you haven't heard about the project, I will talk about it towards the end, and you can get involved as well. But this is one question that we are asking as a part of that project. And it highlights to me a pathway towards inclusion that we can all be moving along and towards. We're all, whether we like it or not, are on different points of this path. The end goal, inclusion, may in fact just be an ideal. It may be a utopia rather than a reality that we can actually achieve. But I think that's the point of seeing the path rather than the destination, rather than just kind of lording. Like, we are aiming for inclusive education. Where are we? What are we doing? How can we improve upon that? Are the kinds of questions that we can continuously ask ourselves. And this is a part of the project that I'm working on to help people identify where they are on that path and give them support and advice to help them move further along. Okay, so as part of this project, because some people are already involved in this, I'm going to look at a few statements that people have already submitted. There's no judgment on these statements at all, and they're anonymous, so you won't know who they came from anyway, just me. But I think that the statements that we look at help us to visualize this path and the progression that we can make along it. So the first one that somebody has submitted, inclusive education is about gathering all pupils in the same place. Now, I certainly wouldn't disagree with this. That is at the heart of inclusive education. Excuse me while I have my tea. But when I look at this and I think about it in terms of our inclusive education pathway, I feel like we could do better. We could improve upon this, I think. So let's look at the second statement. Okay, inclusive education, meeting the needs of students with additional needs and helping them participate in the classroom and learn. So I think this is a little bit further along. This is not to say that the person who wrote the first statement is not further along in their thoughts. It's obviously just a representation of what they've actually written. So we need to take that into account as well. But I think this one draws out a little bit more about not just getting students into a classroom together, but what are we doing with them? How are we recognizing that some of them do have additional needs? And what do we do to help them participate? So not just having them in the classroom, but having them participate fully in the activities that we're doing. So I think this, in terms of a statement, is perhaps a little bit more further along the line. Let's have a look at the third one. An approach to educating individuals through including them in all the activities worked on despite their differences and through using those differences. And I really like this one. I think the end of this statement really pushes that thinking. So now we've got them in class, we've got them participating. Maybe we're doing things like differentiation so they can access the materials, and maybe they're collaborating with their peers. But this actually, I think this statement's really nice in the fact that it's not just talking about changing to get them included, it's actually using those differences as well, actually seeing their strengths and using them as an opportunity. So I really like this particular statement. Can we go even further? Could I have had a fourth statement? Could we improve on this statement as well? I'm sure we could if we were to sit down as a group and analyze it. For example, they put including them in all the activities worked on. We could extend that to in all activities or in all aspects of school life. You know, we can expand that. It's not just about what goes on in the classroom, it's about what goes on across all aspects of school and out of school as well. So a fully inclusive system. But these are a nice way, and I think they really visualize that pathway quite nicely. I hope you all get involved in the project itself, and we can start to see some more of these types of statements. Okay, so why should we strive for an inclusive education? Inclusive education is referring to the capacity of schools to respond to the needs of all learners, including those requiring extra support due to learning, maybe physical disability, social disadvantage, cultural differences, or other barriers to learning. It acknowledges that all students or all children can learn, and that all pupils, including many of those considered to be non-disabled, need some form of support in learning during their time at school. At some point, each student will need some kind of support. Something may happen at home, something they may be going through something. We all know that our students go through developmental stages as they pass through their whole learning journey. They're in school for a long time, 12 years or something. What we're aiming for is an ethos of inclusion, I think. And I think underpinning that is the principle of equity. So we talk a lot about equality, but I think what we need to be aiming for is equity, which is a little bit different. I think equality is making sure everybody has access to the same. Equity is more about providing people with what they need so that they can actually maximize their potential. There's also a great focus on inclusivity beyond school these days, and I think there's a huge movement globally, which is identifying the contribution that differences can bring, for example, to the workplace. So I've got a video very quickly, I think it's maybe 2 minutes long, that we can watch. And this is from HSBC. I have my gripes with HSBC on a lot of things, but I think they really should be congratulated for this type of work, for this type of video that they've put together. Let's have a watch. If you get an echo from the thing, let me know and I will turn off my mic.
If a person were to say to me, wow, you're really good at thinking about concepts, for example, the equivalent of that for me would be to say to a person, wow, you're really good at breathing.
People think that you're thick. People think that you're thick.
They think that I can't read.
That we're dumb, that we're slow, we're uneducated.
It's quite the opposite.
I'm neurodiverse because I am autistic.
I have something that's called Asperger's syndrome, which is an autistic spectrum disorder.
I'm dyslexic.
I have Asperger's syndrome.
I'm dyslexic and I also have dysgraphia.
I have dyslexia and dyscalculia.
I got an ADHD diagnosis a few years ago, and it was actually the first time in my life that I made sense to myself.
I just think it's the way my brain's wired up.
Just wired differently.
I am not seeing what everyone else is seeing. There's obviously a huge advantage to that, but we've only learned to appreciate this potential over the last few years.
One way of understanding neurodiversity is if we've got people who we call normal, we call them neurotypical, they can see the visual spectrum of colours going from red to indigo. Neurodiverse people, they might not be able to see blue, but they can see in infrared. Now you've got somebody in your team who can see in the dark. Do you want to have that person in your team? Of course you do.
Many of my strengths, I believe, come from my autism.
I'm good at retaining knowledge. I know where to find the knowledge.
My brain is incredibly logical. One of my main traits is I can take lots of different sort of level 2D drawings and then make them into a 3D model in my head and be able to spin them around.
I'm very good at spatial things. I built a kitchen in our house 12 years ago. Bought all the bits from IKEA. Fitted the whole thing. And somebody said to me, well, where did you make a plan that? I didn't. I did it all in my head.
So ADHD is basically like watching 30 different channels at the same time and somebody else is holding the remote control. I am calm in situations where a lot of other people get really anxious. There's limited fear to actually make a decision, which I sometimes find very helpful in a business context, because sometimes we just have to decide something to be able to move ahead.
I can hold very large, very complex systems in mind.
The way I look at the world is black and white. It's not the grey areas in between. I can think logically, I can think straight down the middle, and it brings in the team in together so that it's not going round and round in circles.
I think one of the biggest challenges for me is that neurological differences are invisible. Don't assume everyone else, just because they look like you or they have a similar job or that they think in the exact same way.
I would say definitely don't be afraid to talk about it.
For me, I would say speak to your managers and let them be aware. And I think by doing that, it makes you more confident and more freer.
It's not something that all of us are easy talking about, but the more we do talk about it, the more people understand and will appreciate the different abilities and the different gifts that neurodivergent people can actually bring to HSBC.
Okay, I think some people struggled maybe with the visual or the sound during that. I've turned my sound down. Can you still hear me on the mic okay? Yep, I'm coming through okay, the same as before. Okay, good, good. Sorry if you couldn't hear that, but you can type that into Google. Just go to YouTube, type in HSBC and neurodiversity. You can watch that in your own time, no problem. Okay. Okay, so the area of diversity and inclusion we're going to mostly look at here today is going to be around SEN, special educational needs. Yeah, it is a really good video. I like that one. I think it really shows that the world is changing in its approach and opinions around the way that people have differences and the way we can utilize those differences. I really like it as well. Okay, so we're going to move on to special educational needs. So again, a few questions. You don't have to answer them here. Just think about them to yourself. What do you understand by the term SEND, special educational needs and disability? What does it mean to you? In the same way that we had the inclusion is statement, the statement or the title itself can mean different things to different people. What comes under that term for you? Do you think it's the most appropriate term? Can you think of a more appropriate term? So have a think about these. I will send the links later as well. I'll be posting this on our YouTube video, so I'll put the links on there. Yeah, autism can come under it, but there's many things, and we don't really have time to go into all of the different types of SENs that there are. We would be here for a couple of days, probably. I'm sure I could list 30 or 40, and by the time we were to look at conditions, symptoms, challenges, solutions, we would be here for a long time. The OECD in 2007 classified different types of special educational needs. They put 3 categories. Category A is disabilities, so it could be sensory, it could be physical or intellectual impairments. B is learning difficulties, so specific learning differences such as dyslexia, and then it could be other things. ADHD could come in there as well. And the last one, category C, is disadvantages. So difficulties for students that arise maybe from socioeconomic or cultural or linguistic factors. So there's three categories, broad categories, that they can fall under. Where did this all start? Again, I don't want to spend really a lot of time on this, but for the history buffs in the room, the term was first coined in 1978, so quite a while ago in the UK. It's something called the Warnock Report that kind of kicked off special educational needs development at a kind of policy level. Things were happening before that, obviously, but that kind of started the ball rolling in terms of education. It was being recognized at the time that many children were being excluded from education. There was obviously a huge general drive for education for all, kind of post-industrial revolution, and they realized that many children were being excluded because of various needs that they had. Over the past 40 years, we've kind of moved through various outlooks in terms of how we deal with and include children with special educational needs in education. At the beginning, there was kind of segregation. So they were given educational opportunities, but separate from their peers. Then there was integration, I guess back in the 80s and 90s, where people felt that students should actually be in classrooms with their peers, but very often they were put into special classrooms. They were excluded from their peers in many ways. And we've moved on now to a vision of inclusion. My question is, does something come after this? And we're talking about this pathway, so maybe not, but what will educationalists in 100 years be saying? And what contribution will me and you and the rest of us, what will we have made to this? Will they look back and say, oh, inclusion, yeah, that's old school now. Now we're talking about this. Where are they going to be? And what contribution will we make to that? Okay, we're still talking kind of globally, so I want to kind of bring this into MENA a lot. So I want to think about what developments have been happening in MENA. We're a very large and diverse region, as we've already mentioned, but have a little think, what developments have been made in your country? Because it differs across the region quite considerably, I think. If we look at academic literature, which I'm not going to do, but if we was to look at academic literature on special educational needs in the MENA region, we can see that in the Gulf, there is a fair bit, more so in some than others. In the UAE, there's been quite a lot of movement where I am, here in Dubai. In Oman, there is some academic literature. Even in the Levant, in Jordan, there is some. I really struggle to find very much literature across North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, even Egypt. That doesn't mean to say that people aren't doing it. That doesn't mean to say that it doesn't exist. Obviously, we've already mentioned that we are a linguistically rich region. So it may be that there is inclusive education publications in Morocco or in Algeria, which has been done in French, for example. I mean, it's a French-speaking region, so publications could be done in French. And obviously, I don't have access to that. So if anybody does find anything else that's in either Arabic or French or any other language, please do let me know, as I will be interested to see it. In terms of English, it's not the greatest. I just had to cut and paste it from the internet, unfortunately. It doesn't really make much sense. If we're thinking about our particular region, we need to consider that educational development itself may also be more recent. If you think about somewhere like Oman, where I did this session for last week, 50 years ago in Oman, there was only 3 schools. So, the Warnock Report was being written and there was hardly any schools in Oman at the time. So we need to take that into account as well, the kind of historic trajectory of inclusion as well. Okay, so while on the one hand we've made significant progress, both globally and here in our own context, developing a fully inclusive educational system, I think, still has some way to go. And there are a number of debates and tensions and issues that we need to address around that, even during this difficult time around COVID. In fact, perhaps even more so because of it. So let's have a look very quickly at some of these. The first one is, I guess, something that's a bit more philosophical. It's around our efforts, whether or not what we're doing in terms of inclusive education is actually in the best interests of the students who are supposed to be benefiting from it. So there's a bit of tension between having the right to inclusive education, getting students into class with their peers, and actually whether or not they're going to benefit from that, or maybe they would actually do better in another learning environment. That's a difficult debate, not one that we can really address here, but it's something to bear in mind. The second one is around the way that society is structured quite generally. This session is recorded, yes. So there's quite often been a deficit approach to difference and disability, seeing the problem as being within the learner rather than recognizing barriers to learning within the learning environment. And I think society and social structure still largely reinforce this viewpoint. And again, I've got another, I think this is a 90-second video that kind of, again, I think really nicely visualizes that. Let me bring the next video. Hopefully you get better sound on this one.
Imagine a town full of physically impaired people, all wheelchair users. They run everything. There aren't any able-bodied people, so naturally, when they built the town, the community decided it was pointless to have ceilings 10 foot high and doors 7 foot high. So the ceilings were built at 7 foot and the doors at 5 foot. In every way, they designed the place the way they wanted it. One day, a few able-bodied people come to stay. One of the first things they notice is the height of the doors. And the reason they notice is because they keep hitting their heads. They come to stand out by the bruises they carry on their foreheads. Soon, doctors, psychiatrists, and social workers all become involved. Committees are formed. Many people are worried about what becomes known as the problem of the able-bodied. Throughout the town, there is a growth of real concern. Specially toughened helmets are handed out, free to the able-bodied, to be worn at all times. Braces are designed which give support and relief, while keeping the able-bodied wearer bent to normal height. Various groups of compassionate wheelchair users get together and form registered charities. Every quarter they have a collection day. Upturned helmets are left in pubs and shops for people to drop their small change into. There is talk of founding special homes. But then one day, it dawns on the able-bodied that there is nothing actually wrong with them, just that society excludes them.
Okay, again, it seems like some people maybe cannot see it, or I don't know, maybe it's to do something with the system itself. But again, you can type in, I think it's the social construction of something, social construction of society or something, and a social model animation. And you can, again, watch that in your own time if you missed it. Okay, so the way that society is structured also has an influence. And the third one, the idea that some people are arguing that while we talk a lot about inclusive education, we are still probably quite firmly in the integration stage. So students are inside, but still technically on the outside. Now, there's a lot of debates around where a student should be and the consequences of that decision. That's, again, something perhaps not for us here today. But we again need to take into account that if you put a child with additional needs into a mainstream school without adequate resources to support them, then they might not achieve anything at all, or worse, they may suffer from internal exclusion, this inside but on the outside, or they may get bullied, for example. So we need to take some of those things into account. However, if you put them into segregated special schools, people argue that that shows on their record, potential employers in the future can discriminate against them. So it's a really tough one to balance out, I think. but we can take that into account as well. Okay, so we've thought about 3 things very quickly, and the last one is to focus on attitude, and this includes our attitude. We want to promote a growth mindset, I guess, not just for ourselves, but for our colleagues, for our students, for parents, for other stakeholders as well. And there's a lot of work that's being done now on teachers' attitudes, students' attitudes, and how students' experiences within school, their social and emotional experiences, change with how those attitudes play out in the school. And I'd like to focus a little bit for a few minutes on this idea around attitudes. Of course, we're not suggesting that children with disabilities do not have particular needs. It could be anything, it could be medical, it could be learning, it could be dependency. They may require special services or additional resources. But people with disabilities often report that they are seen as incapable in ways in which they are not. And this means that students with special educational needs are often affected by what we call the incompetence stereotype. And that prevents them from engaging in challenging or evaluative situations. An example of that is people in a wheelchair are often thought to be intellectually hindered in the classroom, and they get treated differently sometimes because of that. So it's imperative to focus on the talents, interests, and abilities of individuals, and this includes attitudes towards people with SEND. So I'd like to, again, do one more task around our assumptions and judgments around students with special educational needs. So I want to watch another video. I'm sorry that you guys are struggling. This is the last video that I'm going to show, actually, in this session. But this is a really nice one. It's an award-winning animation, and I like the way that it shows us quite visually. So I hope you can see this one. Apologies if you can't. Yeah, I think I agree. I've been watching the comments there in the chat box, and I agree. It's a really powerful video, this one. I've watched it a few times, thankfully, so you don't have to see me weep in front of an audience. But I think there's a lot of layers to that video, a lot of ways that we can analyze it. I mean, how did your assumptions, how did your judgments change, your feelings towards the boy change as you went through the video? And we do this all the time. We're conditioned, we're trained to focus on a perceived vision of normality. And that includes in our expectations of children and what they should be able to do. Think about ages and stages. That's a really kind of classic one. So challenging that is important, I think, when it comes to inclusive education. So think a little bit about the kind of messages that video had for you. Okay, so for the next part, I'd like to bring this a little bit closer to home. I did see somebody mention this in the chat box. I want to bring this right back down to the classroom for the final part of the session. And think about how special educational needs are actually experienced by those who are tasked with trying to develop and promote inclusive education on a day-to-day basis. This is a quote that somebody wrote. I know I have children with special educational needs. In my class, I want to help them and we're supposed to promote inclusion, but I'm really not sure how I'm supposed to do this. You know, there's so many different ways that we can approach it. There are so many different types of special educational needs. So these ideas about all children learning together sounds ideal, but what does that mean when you're a teacher standing in front of a class or doing an online class these days? You know, we've got to face the reality that teachers around the world have extremely large classes often. Sometimes they have limited resources, they have limited time, sometimes they have limited training, specific training around special educational needs. Maybe you've attended professional development sessions in the past. There's a lot of you here, more than 100. So I'm sure each person has got their own professional development around SEN. But I would say that if I look at some of the results that are coming in on the project that we're running, teachers do feel quite confident. Now, of course, again, this is very subjective. I asked people, when it comes to supporting students with learning difficulties, they feel confident. A lot of people are kind of saying, yeah, we do feel confident. But of course, that can change from day to day. You only got to have one bad class or one bad experience, and your confidence can quite easily dip. People most of the time feel knowledgeable about appropriate strategies to fully support students in their class. But again, we need to dig deeper on this. Ask them knowledgeable about what types of conditions or strategies are you talking about? Is it the more common ones? Maybe it's around ADHD or dyslexia. Or what about less common ones? And again, from my point of view, the purpose of the project itself is to look at the support that teachers are getting from schools themselves. How can we assist that? But also, what can we do as publishers as well? So we're going to look at that as well. Conscious of the time. But I've got a scenario for you. Your manager comes to you one morning and tells you that you're going to be receiving a student in your class this week who has special educational needs. Now, of course, this is probably, maybe it's happened to you. It's happened to me back when I worked in education or in the classroom. So we need to ask certain questions. How do you feel about that? What kinds of questions do you have? What would you do next? And again, these are questions that you can be thinking about yourself in terms of how you feel. Maybe you feel anxious. Maybe you feel nervous. Maybe you already feel overwhelmed. But maybe you feel happy. Maybe you feel optimistic. Questions that you might have could be, are they diagnosed or are they not diagnosed? What kind of support will I receive? What's our relationship with the parents like? What is the condition itself? You know, these kinds of questions. And then what would you do next? I mean, when it comes to special educational needs, certainly here in MENA, I think that the brunt of the workload generally falls on the shoulders of the teacher. They're the ones that, you know, have to do the research. They're the ones that have to kind of figure it out. They're the ones that have to get to know the student, put in extra time to get to know the parents, try and find advice from other people, scramble around. Am I finding it from the internet? Am I finding it from colleagues? Is there someone else I can approach in my own context that can help me with this? And that's, you know, additional workload that we need to take into account. I think that also we need to accept that it could be one of the more common SENs, like autism or ASD. It could be ADHD or dyslexia. And if that was the case, maybe when I say, how do you feel? You may feel confident. Yeah, I've had dyslexic students in the past. I've got a few strategies which I can start off with and then get to know them along the way. But what if it's a less common condition? Maybe they have anxiety, maybe they have panic attacks, maybe they're a cancer patient, maybe they've got epilepsy, maybe they've got something even more rare and remote, like a friend of mine, their little boy has cataplexy. I don't know if anybody knows what cataplexy even is. It's if you experience very strong emotions, you have very sudden muscle loss. So, you know, they could just like burst out laughing because they find something really funny, and then slam, they will just they'll hit the ground. Their legs will just give out. And it can make you think that they're fainting, but they're not. They're complete control of their mental capacities. It's a form of narcolepsy, basically. But, you know, how do we take that into account? How do we adapt our classroom for a student with cataplexy? Maybe we don't even know what it is. It can take a while to actually figure out what that condition is if they're not diagnosed. So there's lots of different things going on depending on the student and their particular needs. We also need to take into account that they may have multiple needs and they may be overlapping as well. So we always need to work from the individual out. There isn't really a textbook solution to working with these students. although there are a lot of commonalities which can help us, and I'll show you some of them at the end. So it's clear that there are a lot of challenges faced by teachers in creating fully inclusive teaching environments. It could be time, it could be resources, could be managing students, that's managing behavior, but also managing attitudes as well. And then, of course, we need to take into account curriculum needs, meeting the needs of our syllabus, and we need to take into account assessment as well. So another question, again, do you agree or disagree? A regular teacher cannot really include a child with a disability in their class without additional resources and specialist training. I'll give you a second, actually. Maybe people do want to agree or disagree. I think there will be a heated debate, probably. Yeah, okay, so I agree, it's a great challenge, yeah. You think it's impossible though? A lot of people are agreeing. Okay, so you definitely need additional resources and specialist training. Okay, good. Okay, so for the last 10 minutes, we're going to look at some of the practical things that teachers can do, and then we'll move on to what we are doing ourselves. The first one, this is around kind of mindsets. Accept that you already have special educational needs students in your classes. I think the kind of global average is around 10%, and it depends on the need. If you think about dyslexic students, I think they say there's probably around 15%, something like this. So there's a good chance that, you know, if you've got a class of 30 students, that 4 or 5 of them probably have either dyslexia, they could have something else. So, you know, these students are already in our classrooms. So we need to work with what we have. I've mentioned this one already. In terms of whether you agree or disagree, I think it's really important to focus on their talents, interests, and abilities first. One of the most important things we can do is notice things, record things. One of the things we perhaps don't do, some people are really good at this, is recording classroom narratives. I think somebody actually mentioned something along these lines in the chat box further up. But we need to record and reflect upon things as much as possible. Reflective practice in education is not something new. The more you can do it, the more we can improve, I think. But there are a lot of common things that we can notice. I mentioned that there's a lot of different types of special educational needs, but we can look for kind of common difficulties, whether that's behavior, whether that's memory, coordination, it could be motor skills, attention. But we need to record that as well. Depending on what age group you are teaching, if you're teaching older students, you may just be rectifying the errors of people that have come before you. So if people have been not particularly inclusive in primary school and you're doing secondary teaching, we may just be building the confidence of students and parents about what they can actually achieve in the classroom and in their education overall, I think. So this is really important. Depending on where you are and depending on what type of school you're in, you may already have a framework of continuous professional development in your school around inclusivity. You may have a diversity policy, you may have an inclusion policy already. Do you have a SENCO at your school who can support you? What kinds of things do you do? Do you have student-parent consultations? Is there coaching available for you? Do you run systems of cascade training? So maybe if there's 4 or 5 teachers, you all pick a particular need and you do some research on it, and then you come together and share as a group so that you cut down the amount of input that each person needs to do. That can be really helpful. Think about your curriculum. It's ironic that the thing that overshadows and informs most of the things that we do within the classroom is also probably one of the major barriers to learning. It's created by us, so it's something that we can look at, we can analyze, we can change accordingly. Think about your curriculum and how your curriculum itself can be a barrier to some children learning. Yeah, exactly. It's really challenging sticking to the curriculum, but I think teachers need to challenge that as well, collectively. And also, I mean, again, a lot of you probably do this. Do you have individual education plans for students? I'm sure a lot of you do, but what's in those? Is it just academic, or are there other things as well? It could be around social and emotional learning or access to opportunities. So for those of you who agreed, who said that you definitely need resources, additional resources, and you need training to support students with disabilities, some people say that actually maybe you don't. Sometimes it's just about small, simple steps that we take. So for example, a lot of you are probably using published material, but you probably already, or I would hope that you're all using resources that you create yourself, because you have to adapt things, you have to fill in the gaps, you have to change things according to your syllabus. So if you're printing something from the printer, what fonts are you using? What color of paper? These can make a difference to students, especially dyslexic students or students with things like dyspraxia. For students who have problem with motor skills, things like pencil grips are very simple and can help students as well. But also think more generally about the lighting, where students are sitting, what's the layout of the classroom, you know, at what height do you put posters on the wall? All of these things can be a barrier to learning. If you are hard of sight, if you have sight problems, the location of things on the wall could be just notices, signs, all make a difference to your experience in school. Yeah, and I think policies really help to bring that out. We'll look at that in a second. Prioritize experiential learning. Again, we could do a whole session on this, but it's something to keep in mind. The more experiential your activities, the more students can gain from them. I'm going to race through the last ones. Awareness raising is the last one. I think I've already kind of mentioned that. And I think when it comes down to it, the teachers who are probably the most inclusive are the ones who learn to differentiate probably the best. Now, we often think about differentiation in terms of content and methods. You know, we have the kind of standard or supportive or challenging. You know, we have these kind of three layers when we differentiate content or methods. But we also need to think about differentiating the environment. I just mentioned some lighting and layout, for example. And also we need to think about assessment as well. We need to think about the fact that students have different ways to express what they know and what they can do. Quite often when it comes to assessment, you know, we're asking a student to do something in an arbitrary time frame. You know, if they cannot do it within that time frame, does that mean they don't know? Or could they have done it if it was presented to them in a different way, if they were given a little bit more time? These things all affect. We quite often, you know, we have a kind of very one-size-fits-all approach to assessment. And we need to challenge that a little bit as well, I think. Here's a simple task that you can do. Think about barriers in your school. It could be in your classroom, it could be in the school in general, and think about what assets exist. So we're thinking about what things can you very easily take advantage of to help you overcome those barriers. You know, and you could just go through a task with your either with your Senko, or you could make a group of teachers and go through a task like this. Our ultimate aim, though, is for a better model of cooperation. So we know that a child tends to do better in school if they're within a well-supportive family structure. The family tends to do better if they're supported by the school, and the school is embedded within a community. These are the situations where children tend to do much better. But there's lots of different kind of stakeholders going on here. When we think about parents, parents are our number one go-to when it comes to student outcomes. If we have well-supported or well-supportive parents, and they're included in what we're doing with students in class, students do tend to do better. But building a home school partnership, you know, it takes time and it's not that easy. We need to take into account also how parents feel. Parents often feel quite powerless, or the parents of students with SEN often feel quite powerless. So we need to give them voice and choice in the classroom as well. Think about what kind of networks exist in your context. There will be a lot. You can Google, what can you access? Are there non-governmental organizations? Can you access things from UNICEF or whatever? Are there people in your area, in your network, that can support you with certain students? It all comes down to good leadership, I think. So we need to think about what our policies look like. And what we want is for schools to make special educational needs and disability what happens here, rather than what we add on to what happens here, because I think that can happen a lot of the time. So think about, does your school have an inclusion policy? Do you have the SENCO? Technology, we don't need to think about. Research, there's a lot being done. We mentioned that earlier. I think when it comes to cooperation, most teachers will rely on each other. And there is a lot of support and experience amongst us as a group. So one of the things we've been trying to do as Macmillan is to try and bring a lot of those people together so that you can ask the question, I have this particular student, or I have this group of students, does anybody have any support that I can draw on? And people who have been in a similar situation can help you with that. Don't forget to draw on the students themselves. They're a lot more compassionate than we often give them credit for. And they can guide you as well if we give them, again, choice and voice. That's important. The last thing I want to focus on for the last couple of minutes is the publishers, because that's where I come in. So what do publishers do? They do a lot of things already. They do differentiation tasks. If you look at something like Global Stage, there are differentiated writing tasks. Secondary book, Optimize, has a brochure with practical tips for more inclusive classrooms. Sometimes it's in the design. Something like Academy Stars has dyslexic-friendly fonts throughout the book. Story Central has sign language videos to go along with vocabulary. So there's a lot of things that publishers are already taking on board. Well, can we do better? What else can we do? That's to do with products, but we also do a lot of other things. Macmillan is obviously is a part of Springer Nature, so we have a lot of research that goes into, we have publications. Sometimes there are practical things. So if you are teaching at upper high school or foundation programs, this Studying with Dyslexia book is actually for students. It's a pocket book that gives them tips about how to do academic work at a kind of university level. But there's also things that we have. We have blog posts, and the thing for dyslexic students is a brochure that I am posting in the module that we're running. But I still think that we can do more, and I think sometimes it needs to be more contextualized. Sometimes the things that we have are kind of global, like the dyslexia brochure. So we are running a module at the moment. It's free. It's probably, I'd say, 3 to 4 hours of your time maximum. If you haven't seen it yet, please do get involved. I will actually share the link here. So I put a banner along the top. I hope you can see that. It says free professional development module. You can register just by clicking that button. But part of this module works on a reflective cycle. So we're testing your assumptions like we did with the video. We're trying to bring together a kind of reading list, whether that's blog posts, which are easily accessible, or something more academic around inclusive education. So you've got a kind of one place to go to for support, and we'll post things on there that are around specific needs like dyslexia that we can put on there as well. But what we want is for people to have a voice themselves. We want you to pick things in your context which have meaning to you, and to make one side of A4 mini action research project. And then we're going to collaborate together in the group to kind of review them and give each other ideas. So really bringing people together as a community. Now, there's different ways we can do that. You could either pick a very specific focus for your project. Let's say you pick dyslexia, you pick a dyslexic student, or you could pick all the dyslexic students in your school. What challenges do they face? What are their strengths? Because we really want to draw that out. What can you do as the school? But what can we do as the publisher to support you as well? You might want to make your project more general. So you could just describe your context. You could think of an innovation within your school. One of the things I would recommend is stand outside of your school and look at the school and think, what barriers to inclusion are there here? Then enter the school, go to your classroom. Again, think about it from the perspective of different types of students. If I was dyslexic, what would be a barrier to me in this classroom? If I was hard of hearing, what would be a barrier to me? Continuously test and push yourself from the perspective of your students. That will help you, I guess, empathize and think about how you can change very small steps, like we were mentioning, in the classroom to make sure that those barriers are reduced. So there are a couple of things that, ideas that we'll come up with. The project will run until the end of November, so there's plenty of time for people to do it. That's it from me. I've run a couple of minutes over, apologies for that. I'd like to end on one final message, which is that we should teach the kids we have, not the ones we want to have. And again, think about those scenarios that I just mentioned. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure you've probably got lots of questions, please feel free to ask them either now. I'm free for 10 more minutes, that's no problem. My email address is there, so you can email me if you want to talk about something very specific. Please join our groups, because this is where we update the MENA teachers, I guess, with all of the professional development opportunities that we run. The main one's on Facebook, but we do have a LinkedIn one as well. Just type that MENA PD Academy by Macmillan Education into either of them. We do have a new YouTube video as well, and I will post the recording of this session onto our YouTube page, probably tomorrow. Thank you very much. I hope you find it interesting, and I hope that we can work together to improve inclusivity across our region. We do have some way to go. The publisher is here to support you as much as possible, but we need your input on that. So do get involved in that module. Give us your feedback. It doesn't take very much time, but it will really help you to kind of think about what's going on in your school. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you to everyone. I'll stay here for a few minutes. Anybody wants to stay behind and ask a question, you're more than welcome to. I will check the chat as well. Okay, how about making special toys and games? There are already a lot available, perhaps not by the publishers. So again, in the module, we can look at this as an area of focus, and we can also feed back then into the publisher. Okay, people using this particular type of product, maybe it's pre-primary or lower primary, what kinds of maybe online games, or what kinds of things that can we develop as a publisher to make some of those resources more accessible to a variety of students. So that's a really good one, and I'll take that on board. Try and see if there's anything else. Okay, how can we help our students when we're having distance learning? We're definitely going to focus on that inside the module, because obviously that is what's going on for most people these days. In fact, I think that when it comes to distance learning, a lot of students are actually finding online teaching more inclusive. If you're autistic, that kind of learning environment really suits you, with the kinds of, it depends where you are, obviously, on the spectrum, but this idea that you can be alone and connect to education through the internet, I think they actually quite like it. But again, it depends on conditions, it depends on students, it depends on individual circumstances. So we'll look a little bit about that as well. Yeah, I think there's more disadvantages than advantages, probably. Yeah, okay, well, we'll look at the advantages and disadvantages of distant learning. Right, excellent. Yeah, it is very difficult to, I've just lost it, encourage them. So yeah, motivation is going to be a big part of bringing different types of students. And again, that's where I guess relationships with parents is key. And also adapting the way that we approach motivating in an online environment is important. So we'll definitely cover that as well. Mohammed, I would love to visit Oman soon. I would be there tomorrow if I could, but the border is still closed, I believe. But as soon as they let us travel, I'm sure Oman will be one of the first places I visit because I am right next door. I'm looking forward to meeting you as well. Great. I'm looking forward to having you on the module. I will stay for a couple more minutes. If anybody else wants to ask any questions, you're more than welcome. Sorry if you missed the videos. I will also post the links to them as well. So if you missed them, you can catch up. I'm sure Qatar I will also be visiting in the beginnings of 21, hopefully. Keeping my fingers crossed. My next session, I haven't actually booked anything yet, but I'm sure there will be a session in maybe mid to late November, I'm sure. Before we break, I usually take it easy in December because, you know, why not? But I'm sure I'll do something before we do break for the winter. Good. Good, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you all this evening, and I will close the session now, but please feel free to email me. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody. Good night. Yes, please do register for that module. If you didn't click that link, I've just deleted it. Sorry. Send me an email and I will send you the link. Take a screenshot with your... Good, excellent. Thanks, guys, and I will speak to you all very soon. I'll speak to you tomorrow if you're in the module. Take care and good night.